Recording. Hi folks, Abram Dickerson here with Aspire Adventure Running. Really psyched to start our Spring Training Community 2021. So we'll see who shows up.
Woohoo!
Yeah, so I think eventually we'll get some information about people tuning in. So usually it starts populating. Oh, it says 37 participants. Yeah, we got people participating. Welcome, folks. There's the information for people that are tuning in. Great. So if folks just want, as they're tuning in, maybe just like drop their name in the chat and where you're from. That would be great. So Carlos from Wichita, welcome. All right, cool. Awesome. Oh yeah, people are dropping in. Whoa, fantastic. Well, as people are signing in, it's really great to have everyone. Oh, hey, there's Jim Manson from Palm Desert. How are you, Jim? Recognize a few people, some new names, which is fantastic. So I just want to kind of give a quick scope for what people can expect from us tonight. The whole goal and hope with the spring training community that Aspire's put together is to serve you. So really this is for you to support all of your running goals and adventures, whether that's with us or other projects you have in the hills in the endurance orientation. What we want to do tonight is introduce Andrew, get a sense of him and his background as a coach. Then we want to hear a little bit from you. We've got a poll that we'll launch here a little further down the line. Just get a sense from where people are coming from in terms of their training background and their goals with the spring training program. So that'll be a poll that we'll drop here momentarily. And then we'll do a deep dive at the training plan, really kind of what is the arc of the training modality over the 3 months and kind of what that progression looks like. Then we'll kind of go into it in a more specific kind of, minutia in the sense of like, what are some of these terminology that we're using here? What does it mean? And I think with that, we really want to open it up to questions that folks have. So that's the arc of the evening. So let me just, Andrew, why don't you introduce yourself? I've been talking for a little bit, then I'll kind of come in on our goals for Aspire. So just who you are, where you're from, why you do what you do, and why you're working with us.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a good place to start. Really, is I met the Aspire crew in Abe, and when I was running the Wonderland Trail, something we do every year, and we were rolling into Howard Lake, kind of fast packing the first 2 days, and we were wet, misty, cold as it tends to be at Mowich, and these guys had something going on that was just so attractive as far as energy and stoke level and just what they were up to. And I got to know the crew and kind of the ethos and what this company is all about. And I've since participated and been involved in some talks at the Running Rendezvous up at Mount Baker. And I just can't say enough good things about the energy behind this group. And so I'm really excited to be here for that reason, because, I think running is a blue collar sport, and you got to put in the miles, but I think there's also a lot of mentorship, and that's what I kind of have come to this particular opportunity with, kind of on the mentorship end, is trying to offer some folks some insight and set the rudder for a training plan and answer some questions and ultimately help get you prepped for, as Abe started out with, whether it's one of their trips or a human powered push that you've got coming up this spring or summer. I'm really here to help, and that's what I do for a living. I'm a doctor of physical therapy and with U.S. ski teams and sports performance in Park City, where I live with my wife. I've been racing as a professional triathlete since 2013, and cycle tour and trail run a fair bit. And I just love the culture of endurance sport, and that's really why I'm here. And so the one thing that I would tack on to what Abe has said so far is this is all about community for me. And so I'm really grateful to be here and offer what I can.
Awesome. It's really great to have you. I mean, I really, there's a lot of folks, that, I don't know, there's lots of different approaches to endurance sports and athleticism. And I've really appreciated our conversations and our work and really focusing on athletes, helping them achieve their goals, maintaining a healthy mindset in relationship to their goals and to their bodies, and having a sustainable, lifelong connection to moving in wild spaces,
Yeah.
because they're fit and they're trained and they're healthy, and that takes some work and that takes some education, and it's it can be hard to kind of navigate all the different plans and resources and modalities and exercises that are out there. So as I've matured as an athlete, I really value the education that's available, and I really appreciate your approach. So I'm excited to work with you on this.
Stoked.
Great. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and just launch a poll here. So if folks just don't mind taking a moment and just kind of giving us a little bit of a sense of who you are. We're curious about how much training background you have, what your summer goals look like. We're curious about kind of how you see yourself engaging with the spring training community. Hopefully folks have had a chance to download the program and take a look at that. If not, I can drop a link to that in the chat as well. If people need to kind of actually see the training plan. But my assumption is that everyone has already had a chance to look at that. So give us a sense of who you are. As you're doing that, one of the questions that comes up consistently in relationship to Aspire in our trips is like, oh, I would love to do that. Am I ready? Am I fast enough? Am I strong enough? And it's a really difficult question to answer, because I really firmly believe that our model is accessible and open to runners of a variety of backgrounds and strengths. And so, yes, there needs to be, a baseline for endurance and physical fitness, but it looks really different depending on what individuals' goals are. So whether you're trying to do a big day with a real strong emphasis on speed and efficiency, or do you simply want to have a big day in the mountains and cover a set distance and be able to eat and recover and do that again the next day? And so how you approach your goal with our trips is really different. So but it's a question I get asked a lot. And so, it's a question that Andrew and I spend a lot of time trying to kind of like, well, how do we position this plan in relationship to people with so many different backgrounds?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts just on that as people are filling this out?
Yeah, and I don't want to sidetrack people as they're filling this survey out. I just tried to fill it out, and then I got to the bottom, and it said the host can't answer these. So I'll let people take a minute, but I think this is a good segue to the themes that we'll see when we go through the plan, and I think this speaks directly to the common question that we get a lot is like, how do I know when I'm ready? If I'm ready, is it going to be miserable, or how fit do I need to be? And I would agree. It depends heavily on the goal, but ultimately, what we'll see when we go through this plan that we've outlined for folks is that knowing your body and using rated perceived exertion. In other words, not too loose leashly, just going by feel, but having a sense of making hard days hard, easy days easy. What we're trying to do here and what we've outlined is something that I think will equip people to, regardless of whether you're trying to go super duper fast and really put in a really big, hard, long day versus survive 3 days on the Wonderland Trail or the Lost Coast. It's kind of designed for people to get the most out of it just by using rated perceived exertion a fair bit and kind of further establishing how their body's really feeling during training, during efforts, during intervals. And I think that speaks to one of my, I guess if there's a barb that I care a lot about when it's working with athletes as a physio or as a coach, it's longevity. I want to be able to do this for a long time. I want to be able to be a endurance athlete for years and years to come. And I think part of that technology is a really good tool for us, but then so too is having a sense of how our body's actually feeling and when we're rested and when we can go hard versus when we need to lay up. So yeah, I think developing that sense is important.
Let's dive into that. I mean, let's just start talking about that right here, right now. I mean, that perception of effort. Like, how do I go about quantifying that? Is that something I need a heart rate monitor for? Is that something I need to be journaling about? Like, if we're saying that our trips are available to a variety of athletes, if we're saying that this program is available to a variety of athletes, that in some ways that's not really helpful at all, right? It's like, well, what does that really mean? So when you're talking about this perception of effort and quantifying that, can you help me interpret that into my effort, into my training plan?
Yeah, I think, again, with one of the most important things in my mind for any athlete is longevity, meaning that we don't do harm. First rule, do no harm. Like, we don't want to be training to the point of injuring our bodies. So we need to be doing things that speaks to the second most important thing in my mind, which is repeatability. So it's all about, when we're talking about endurance sport, I think something that is often overlooked is the ability to stack fitness, like layers of fitness, over days upon days upon days, session to session, week to week, weekly wave to weekly wave, monthly wave to monthly wave. And so I think a big piece is repeatability, and it's also longevity. And the best way to tune into kind of, what am I able to tolerate is putting in a lot of longish days at a relatively easy effort. I could use, I live more in the world of triathlon. So what I'll use, as an example right now, we're seeing a lot of Norwegian triathletes that are doing very, very well right now, but really we trace those roots back to Nordic. The Scandinavian countries have done really well in endurance sport for years upon years upon years. And what we've seen when we look at longitudinal studies of those folks is that they really do a whole bunch of easy training over a prolonged period of time. So where I'm going with this is easy means easy, and hard really means hard. And what you'll find when we look at this program is that there's a fair bit of easy training that we then add a variable of density, where you're doing a fair bit of easy training, but you're doing it back-to-back days later in the program. And so that's, I don't know if that directly answers the question, but I mean, easy ultimately should be conversation effort. 10 out of 10 is everything you can muster. Extensive endurance effort is a key limiter for most long distance endurance athletes, and that's 3 to 4 out of 10. So it's conversation effort. But if you compound that by a 3-hour run, it'll get hard eventually, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I just got a question from Paul asking about what the plan is. I just dropped a link to it in the chat. So why don't we do, I've got, just so folks are aware, thank you for your feedback on the poll. Can you see those responses, Andrew, from the audience, where folks are coming in on that, or is it just me?
I'm looking just at the chat box. That's all I'm getting on my end, I believe. Oh, there we go. I've got it now.
Great, awesome. So you can get a sense and a feel. So if folks, as we're going through this, if folks have questions, if they can put those into the Q&A section, I will kind of manage those as we go. So if things are coming up that Andrew is talking about and you're like, what, I don't really totally clearly understand that, throw that in the question and I'll either address it or we'll answer it live. That's kind of a breakdown on feedback. So I think what we should, consider doing if you're down with this, Andrew, is to kind of like, take that principle of, this is a longevity. This is a process, right? Yeah. Person's not going to train for an endurance event, or one of our trips in a week or in a month, right? So as we think about that arc of training, let's kind of just maybe give us an outline of what the training program looks like. It's built out for 3 months. So people have kind of a high level view of what to expect, some of the principles that are informing why it's structured the way it is. And then we can kind of do a more minutia look at what it looks like on a week-to-week basis and some of the key, which you would identify some of the key markers throughout the plan.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant. Are you able to, it says disabled participant sharing. Are you able to, on your end, can I share my screen? Is there a button that's clickable that I could share?
Yeah, you know what?
And if not, no worries. People could scroll through via the link as long as everyone. It looks like
it's just all about finding the right button.
Well, it looks for that. I'll just let folks know what my game plan is here is to, again, kind of take the 10,000 foot perspective and look at this from a broad view, and then we'll kind of go into a micro view. And it sounds like Katie can't see the link.
Two hosts and let me make sure I'm sharing with everyone.
So we got some other folks tuning in. If you're just tuning in,
okay, great. There's the link for everyone.
Brilliant. So I'll see if I can share. Oh no, I still can't share. That's okay though.
I'll see if I can't find it. Oh my goodness.
So for folks tuning in, what we're going to do here is I'll share my screen and I'll kind of go through the 10,000 foot perspective, the kind of the broad view on this training plan, and we'll talk about base phase 1 and 2. And then we'll get into some of the minutia, but really the ultimate goal today is to understand the meat and potatoes.
I just made you the host, so you should presumably be able to share.
Okay, brilliant. Let's do this. Let's share, and let's do desktop. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Abe, can you see my screen?
I've got it.
Okay. I just need this part to go away. Okay. So everyone can see this so far, base phase 1. Can you see that there, Abe?
I can see your screen.
Okay, excellent. So broad scope, let's talk briefly. We just talked a little bit about RPE, but we've got some new folks tuning in. So briefly, when we're talking about rate of perceived exertion, you could interchange these with percentages, right? So 3 to 4 out of 10, which you will see very commonly in this training plan, is 30 to 40%. That's extensive endurance pace. That's conversation effort. That's something you could sustain for a prolonged period of time. If you sustain that for a prolonged period of time, meaning later in the plan we're going to be doing 3 to 4 hour, 5 hour runs, eventually that will get hard. But I do think it's good to point out a good chunk of what you'll see for our base pace running is around 3 to 4, right? And so we want to avoid this kind of gray area of 5 to 6, which a lot of the athletes that I'm coaching will ask me, it's like, well, if I'm running up a hill, I'm immediately going 7 to 10 out of 7 out of 10 RPE. And so my response very plainly is, well, then you need to slow down and walk. And walking is okay. And anybody who's done a very, very long ultra or a long human power project, you will know that hiking is something that happens, and it's very, very common. And it's kind of the dirty little secret of ultra running is that we hike a lot. So,
which I just think should not be such a dirty secret.
That's a whole other, and don't get me going on trekking poles, because I love trekking poles for steep stuff. But staying the course on this conversation, the reason I'm using rate of perceived exertion is because it would be very, very difficult to be very specific using heart rate data, even though I hold that in high regard. I think through this process, if I can help anybody develop a better sense of what is hard and what is easy, that will serve you much better in the long run. So rate of perceived exertion, 3 to 4 is what you will see a lot, which again is 30 to 40%. It's not super hard. 7 out of 10 to 8 out of 10, that's tempo work. That's when we start doing intervals, which we don't do till later in the plan, but it's good to internalize that 7 out of 10 should be 70 to 80%, which if you're holding that for a sustained effort, again, that will get very hard, but it may not necessarily start at the initial effort. It may not feel like 10 out of 10. Rarely, if ever, are you going to see in this training plan 10 out of 10 effort. I don't think, based on what we're designing this for, which again, to circle back to the intent of this plan, is to get you ready for multi-day running adventures or a single day big push anywhere from 12 to 15 hours. One more point on the broad 10,000 foot perspective on this thing is that by the end of this 12 weeks together, my hope and my intent of designing this is that you could carry on the same scheme meaning the week-to-week, day-to-day scheme, which you will notice is very consistent throughout this plan. You could continue effectively week 10 through 12 until maybe shedding fatigue for a week or two before your key event. So the intent here is to set you up so that the hay is in the barn and all you have to do is maintain fitness and then shed fatigue for 3 to 5 days and then go do an Aspire trip. That's kind of the way that this has been designed. One quick note about density and specificity. When we're looking at base phase one, as is highlighted up here, when I say gradual specificity increase, what I'm assuming there is that you might be getting ready for a big push in Yosemite, or you might be getting ready for a big push on the Lost Coast, where it's multiple days of running, and really it boils down to a ton of time on your feet. So what you'll see later in the plan is more density, meaning back-to-back running days, in conjunction with an increase in intensity work, so intervals. That's specificity. Specificity is basically fitness, which is getting you fit for the task of being able to tolerate multiple days of running. So base phase one, briefly, we're basically trying to accumulate time on our feet, aerobic endurance and strength buildup. So assuming that people are coming out of winter and you have somewhat of a base, we're kind of starting this with a clean slate. And so the bar may be set relatively low for some of you who are coming in from, say, a 60-mile running week. Some people might be coming in from a 10-mile running week. That's again why we're using rate of perceived exertion. But the weekly waves allow you some freedom in here to tack on where is indicated within the plan, which we'll get into. What you also notice, though, is there's so much hard training. So what my one word of caution is, during base phase one, it takes a lot of discipline to be patient. And this is very much, base phase one is about being patient. You might feel good on a day and you want to throw down and throw in some tempo work. All the sessions are designed there for a reason. So if it's designed as 100% meditation, that's giving you a bit of leeway to maybe throw in some peppy, spunky, kind of faster running. But if it's indicated as a long run at 3 to 4 out of 10 RPE, and you go out and you run 7 to 8 out of RPE, I think you kind of lost the workout there. So the rate of perceived exertion is indicated as pretty easy throughout base phase one. I'm going to scroll down, and just a quick note on the way it's designed here. Description of the workout in a week. I'm going to scroll all the way down to base phase 2, but you have your week here and then your days per week. So if we're looking at week 1, we go through day 7, and there's week 2. So I'm going to go all the way down. So base phase 2, is starting. Let's just scroll down here.
As you're doing that, I'm just going to kind of just make a comment, which is like, I really love your analogy. We've used this before. It's like the hay is in the barn. I mean, we're pretty detached from our agricultural roots, but like I lived in Pennsylvania as a teenager for a few years and worked a summer haying. Brutal work. Like I don't really wish it on anybody. But I mean, that's literally days and days, for weeks at a time at the high season in the summer, just like putting all of that literal giant hay bales in the barn. And so I think that analogy is just so apt for what we're talking about, like just that steady, consistent, work and effort that we put in over this base building period, that strength and that endurance is then available for us to tap into. And if we burn out, we go out too hard, we're pushing our workouts too fast, we're not getting the benefit of that storage inside of our musculature. That is the intent of the base building period. I mean, it's so often I hear people ask me about pace, and well, I couldn't go for a run with you because you're probably really fast. You probably run a lot. And I was like, no, really. Like I walk up the hills. Like I'm not trying to go fast right now. Like that's not my goal. But I think, we get so much messaging, regarding our training and our running and, what we should be doing. And so I just really just want to just echo as loud as I possibly can the value of that slow, sustained zone 1, that low perceived effort, that 30% you're talking about is just valuable time. And it's such a healthy time too, right? It's such a healthy way to be outside with your friends, communicating, running, and I think that ties back into the relationships that make our running practice, I think, so valuable. That's such a great opportunity to just have long, great conversations with friends,
100%
on the trail. So this
100%, yeah.
This is the time of my training and cycle that I really enjoy.
100%, and it's all about repeatability too. So it's like, I think Yeah, it's those adventures. It's those low output adventure days with friends where you don't, the intensity is low, I think. And the
Mhm.
other analogy that I love, two of them that I think circle back to base, because I think if back to the Scandinavian countries, there's been a really good longitudinal study that looked at a female Nordic skier. She, has racked up more gold medals in Nordic skiing than anybody in history. And they looked at a longitudinal study of where did she spend the most time in her career of endurance sport. And an overwhelming amount of her time was spent doing very, very easy over distance work. And so I kind of, the other analogy that I have there is it's the foundation upon which we build the house. I mean, if you start to do intensity and a bunch of hard training on top of a weak base or foundation of the house crumbles. I mean, it's not, the durability isn't there, the soft tissue accumulation, it's just not there, the metabolic pathways. So it's there for a reason, for sure.
Yeah.
When we get into base phase 2, it gets a little more exciting, and we'll look at a couple key weeks and sessions within there. But our focus is still on aerobic endurance. But then we start to develop aerobic capacity, which another way I think about that is the ability to do some up tempo. So if there's a climb that you're trying to get up, it's the ability to maintain up tempo. So that's like a little bit of the tempo work that we'll see into our plans, some hill repetitions. That's building the capacity to sustain a harder output for a prolonged period of time. The specific training volume as it relates to this plan in my mind really is those back-to-back sessions. From whether you're getting ready for a 50K, a 100-miler, or an Aspire trip, B2Bs or back-to-back running days really are such a great dose of running, because you're going into the second day a little bit tired, and you really have to nail your fueling on the day one so that you feel good on day two. So it's a really good day to implement a lot of things as it relates to equipment choice, fueling, all sorts of stuff that we're going to talk about within this 12 weeks together. So you will see that increment in base phase 2, the back-to-back days, as well as more intensity work. But I've tried to go gentle as far as intervals. Again, you'll see the most running is going to be done at this kind of easy to moderate output, but the hard sessions, which you'll see much more of, is that 7 to 10. Volume does peak in base phase 2, and this goes back to the original question that Abe was asking, is how do I know if I'm ready? How do I know if I'm able or fit enough to do an Aspire trip? It's hard for me to predict how much time and bandwidth people have. And as a coach, I'm always saying, coach the individual first and the athlete second, meaning it's most important to me that if you have a young school-age child at home, that you're there for the important moments. You're not saying, well, Andrew said I need to go run, so see you later. That's not how this should go, because it breaks the rule of longevity and repeatability. So I'm assuming that there's enough time to dedicate to this plan that meets the basic requirements that I think are probably a good base point to start from to get ready for an Aspire trip. So I've tried to allow some variability in the amount of time kind of required. Hey, would it be okay if we went into this last week of base phase 1 and kind of went through that as an example week, or would it
Yeah,
be a
I
greater
think an
value?
example week would be really effective, and then
Okay.
I think it'd be great to open it up to some questions too. We've kind of been chatting a lot, so
Yeah, no, I'm getting going here. Let's just briefly go through and this is the last week of base phase 1. What you'll see on certain days of the week is not a rest day. It's an absorption day. I use that word intentionally. I think in physio, we rest or we recover from a broken femur. We absorb the fitness, or we let the cream rise, or we get the desired dose from the training when we rest. And so I use the word absorption a lot. So looking at the first day of the week, this is Monday. Daily details, it's not a day off. We're just absorbing the fitness. So that means that you're still an athlete. That means that you should maybe do a little bit of soft tissue work, maybe foam roll the legs, stick the legs, continue to hydrate, treat your body well, fuel clean. Day 2, and this is just an example week, but this is the last week of base phase 1. This is an intensity run. So what you've got here is the main set after a 10 to 15 minute warm up of 4 rounds of 3 minutes on, 2 minutes off. And again, we see that rate of perceived exertion is 7 out of 10. These are hill reps. So this is a 5% gradient preferred. I know some people are a little bit limited maybe in where they live. All you might have at your disposal is an on-ramp. So we may have to get a little bit creative, but You will see in base phase 1 and certainly in base phase 2 a little bit of hill repetitions. At the bottom is just a more of a description of kind of the effort output that we're going for, and maybe some cueing on form at the bottom. Throughout the plan, I've put in optional lifts, and I think that's probably where people may have some questions, because I use terms that make sense to me and some athletes that I'm coaching, but they may make zero sense to somebody else, so I apologize. But I've tried to put YouTube links, as you'll see, in this optional lift. One quick chirp about lifting. I think back to the goals of longevity and being able to get through an Aspire trip or a 50K injury-free and bounce back and start training again quickly. I think lifting is super important. I think strength training is, it's not really an argument anymore. I think it's something that should exist within the weekly schema, but I put it as optional because I know, again, I'm trying to accommodate for people being limited on time. So that may be an off day for you. And then we're back into a base pace run, 45 minutes plus some strides. Usually I'm having people do strides up a slight incline of a hill. So it's 5 to 8 uphill strides, 5% gradient again. And we're just doing 20 or 35 seconds. And there's a bit of a description in here on what strides are. Day 5 of that week is an optional lift. All the lifts are different, but again, there's YouTube links in there that I hope are helpful. And then we're into a back-to-back run. So we have an hour 45 run and then a 75-minute run. And within that, we've kind of got our rate of perceived exertion. You'll often see me offer a little bit of advice on fueling. I think fueling is certainly very, very unique to the individual, and it's more sacred than any religion. And so I know my scope. I'm not a nutritionist, but I also think there's probably some unarguable evidence in the favor of like, well, how many carbs-ish should I be taking in per hour? But that is, this is my disclaimer right now. That is meant to be nothing but helpful. And if that's not what works for you, no worries. Kindly reject it. it's all
I'll
good.
just say too, coming up in May, we've got Shannon O'Grady from Gnarly Nutrition, who's going to be coming in and talking specifically about fueling for performance and training, and she's fantastic. She's a lovely person and super smart, and will kind of really be able to answer some of those fueling questions.
Sweet. So that was a quick kind of a quick run through, but as you're saying, Abe, we're talking a fair bit here, so I want to kind of maybe pause and catch your breath here, maybe get some weigh in from folks if there are questions.
Yeah, so I'd say the easiest place to drop those questions would be in the Q&A. I can kind of, keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A, both. If folks have questions, I can kind of just maybe ask one to kind of get things started. So how do you feel about like substitution, right? So it's wintertime, I'm Nordic skiing, or I'm backcountry skiing, or I'm downhill skiing, or I'm riding my bike. And, these are all written around running. You talk about putting hay in the barn. Like, can I make, what's my ability to substitute, an alternative workout for what you've got put in the plan here?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. And I think if somebody is living in a place where they can sub in a Nordic ski or a ski tour, or a paddle or something that's base pace aerobic, especially during base phase 1, when you're going out for an adventure with friends and you might mountain bike to the trailhead and then go for a run or just go mountain bike, the heart knows no different, and a strong engine is a strong engine. So I would say within this plan, once we get to base phase 2, those back-to-back days, we should probably keep those as run days and probably be a little bit more keep a close tab on getting run mileage up. But for the next 8 weeks of our time together, I 100% endorse multi-sport through and through, especially if it's with friends and it's fun and there's not a lot of undulation and tempo. I mean, if it's truly like a fun adventure day, or you just love the Nordic ski, a strong engine is a strong engine, and the heart knows no different. So I
just want to tag, you said 8 weeks, right? 8 weeks. We're talking about 8 weeks of base building. So that's a long, steady, consistent input.
Yeah. And it's and this is, it's so tricky. So I work, working as a physio with the U.S. ski team. I'll look at some of the programming that we're doing, and I talk about this with colleagues and other folks. When you look at this program, I mean, it's. I would love for it to be super duper exciting and not repetitive, but the reality is, at the pointy end of running and at the pointy end of skiing, it's pretty repetitive. The only difference between high performance and somebody just new to sport is that high performance does a little bit longer and a little bit faster. But yes, it's going to feel, hopefully, genuinely, I hope it feels a little bit repetitive. And you're like, you hit Monday and you're like, oh, it's my Monday meditation run. I get to go as hard or as easy as I want. That's 100% of the base pace and base one phase.
I mean, honestly, this is just me talking, but like there is that consistency and repetition and familiarity that I think is a real. That's why I kind of think about running as a practice, right? It's this thing that we're getting into rhythms too, and then building this awareness of our effort, awareness of our bodies. So kind of a question here. I've got a question for you. I'm going to kind of take the question from Megan and kind of take it a couple different ways. She's asking about how, if coming on the output of this plan, what distances would I be prepared for, and then kind of with that is like, how would I go about modifying? It's like, let's say, I think, we can kind of use the Wonderland as a 3-day, 95, rounded up to 100-mile, adventure. Is this plan, equivalent for a 100-miler run? If I were to do a 100-mile consistency, kind of clarifying that, outcome, if I follow it, where that would place me. And then pairing on that, like if I wanted less than that, it's like, oh, well, I'm just doing the Lost Coast. I'm not just like, I'm doing the Lost Coast. That's 60 miles. Yeah. So how would I go about maybe modifying this to a different trip or a different?
Yeah. I think case studies are a really good way to kind of help bring light to a plan, right? Because it's got to be specific to the individual to an extent. So not too different than this plan. I had an athlete that I was coaching that did the Wasatch 100-mile race last year. And the only difference really from this buildup was he continued base phase 2, meaning those kind of harder back-to-back runs where Saturday might be a 3 to 4 hour run and Sunday might be 75 minutes to 90 minutes. We basically just continued that schema for another 6 to 8 weeks. And then we tapered and he did Wasatch 100. So that's a 100-mile one single push that he did effectively on a very similar plan that we're doing, but we did add more soft tissue accumulation, meaning more time on feet, but we didn't add any longer sessions. So meaning it didn't build from here. At the end of this plan, we didn't start to add in 6-hour runs and 7-hour runs. We did a couple races as test pieces to make sure that equipment, fueling, and pacing were on point, but those were peppered into a little bit of shed fatigue, do the race, recharge a little bit, and then get back into it. So if we're looking at a case study of maybe this for a 100-mile athlete, I think there would be a little bit more, maybe a 6 to 8 week block of similar scheme week to week of what we outlined in base phase 2. And I think that could easily get somebody ready for a 100-mile running race and or the Wonderland Trail. I think on the using that same kind of case study example, for sure, I think somebody could get finished with this plan. And the reality is it would be almost impossible to follow this plan to the T. Life happens. We're going to have to shuffle some sessions every now and again. And that's a good point to bear in mind. Please shuffle sessions as you need to. Just be mindful of density, but life happens. Somebody gets sick at home or work is late. Feel free to shuffle the sessions. But I think the intent here is that you would get done with this plan and you could carry through until 1 to 2 weeks out from an Aspire trip, Lost Coast, Yosemite, Wonderland Trail. We'll use Wonderland Trail as an example, which is a pretty hard effort. It's 3 30-mile days with a fair bit of climbing on day 1. This plan would serve you well to carry through up until the point of a week or 2 out. And when I say shed fatigue, I basically mean Monday through Wednesday. It's easy running or no running at all. And then you ramp back up a little bit, meaning base pace plus strides, which you'll see in that plan. So we just rev the engine a little bit before going on the trip over the course of 1 to 2 weeks. And I think you would be good to go. On the shorter end of this, if you were getting ready just for a 50K, I honestly wouldn't change a thing. I think if you're wanting a plan to help set the rudder so that you don't have to think about what am I going to do on Wednesday versus Saturday versus Tuesday, I think this plan would be very comprehensive for somebody getting ready for a 50-kilometer race. And the scheme would be the same. You'd carry through base phase 2, leading into a week or two out before you shed fatigue and taper for that event. But I think you could cut your total volume down a fair bit and start to ramp it down a little bit more drastically for a 50K as compared to a 100-miler. So the difference there, case study 100-miler, you'd probably need another 6 to 8 weeks or so of building base, basically. For a 50K, I think you could actually drop volume and maintain up to the point of your race. I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me, but I'm not everyone listening. Let us know, folks. Let us know if we're helpful or not. That's our goal here, is to be helpful. Getting some yes makes sense. All right. Woo. But here's a question. I think this is a good segue that Molly asks. And she's kind of curious, are there any particular markers that should associate those transition between the base phase? Like, oh, at the end of base phase 1, you should be able to X, Y, Z, or, are there any sort of self-assessment tools that you would sort of, add to be like, oh yeah, I think I am ready for that next base phase 2, or you know what, I'm not quite there. I'm gonna modify to me and extend my base phase. I'm gonna extend this base phase 1 for another 3 weeks. So
yeah. It's very analogous to climbing a mountain. We are going to accumulate a bunch of fatigue. We are going to start making our way into this bathtub of fitness that's going to fill over time. Some people are going to have to take a session off because life happens. Some people are going to have to, some people might tack on a little bit more than they're supposed to. But as we get rolling and as we get closer to base phase 2, what tends to happen is there's going to be kind of a fork in the road where we will, and the beauty of us meeting once a month is we're going to have an opportunity to get some feedback from you as athletes, where you'll be able to come to me and say, Andrew, I'm tired all the time, or I couldn't get out of bed to do that session, and or are you sure I'm doing enough? This doesn't feel like enough. Is this enough? And that's the value of these monthly check-ins, is where we can roll up the sleeves a little bit once we've accumulated some fatigue and we have a little bit again, hay in the barn. Really, we don't have enough data to answer that yet. But I think the temptation to go do a test piece, I do think it's a great idea if you have races that you would like to do that coincide with a 3 to 4 hour run. Say you want to drop into a 50K, or you want to drop into maybe a trail marathon. There's something that happens when you hear the gun go off. And even if you're not getting ready for an actual race, it does tend to be a great environment to practice your fueling, practice your gear, your kit, everything that you're going to use on your big single push project that you're going to do. Something happens when there's a bunch of people at a start line and there's a gun that goes off. And it doesn't mean you have to go out and try and win the race, but I do think if you want to get some feedback in a semi-controlled environment, I do have athletes oftentimes use races as a training race. And you will see a lot of folks who race 100-milers use a 25K to a 30K to a 50K to get some feedback on, oh, wow, I got to 16 miles and I felt incredible. Or, so it's a twofold answer. I don't think you need to go test it once we transition into base phase 2. But I would say as we start to accumulate fatigue, when in doubt, leave it out. And then come to these monthly meetings and say, I'm tired all the time, I'm not responding. And then we can kind of triage that as we go.
Okay, that's awesome. There's some great questions that are coming in here. So related to that, what's your recommendation when life happens and I get sick and my kid gets sick and I fall off, and it's not just for a day or two, maybe I miss a whole week, or I get in one of 5 workouts and dang, how do I reset? How do I move forward? I mean, that's never happened. That never happens, right?
No, everybody follows a T. Everybody follows the plan to the T. Like nobody ever misses a session, and nobody ever stays late at work, and nobody's kids ever get sick. You know what I mean? Like, and that's the tricky part with I'm equipping you guys genuinely because I want you all to succeed with this plan, but I also give this to you knowing that life does happen, and it's really hard. And this is athlete to athlete telling you, if you miss a session because you get caught up late at work the night before, or a kid gets sick at home, or you sprain your ankle and you need to rest a bit, it's okay. And I think there is enough leeway, and it's long enough within this plan to where, unless it's more than say 10 to 14 days, I genuinely mean this, just cross the session. If you've printed this up, or you're looking at it on the Word doc or whatnot, just let it go. But don't try and make up sessions. There has been a study that I commonly refer to as a British cycling group, and they looked at giving the athletes the opportunity to slide the session fore and aft, and this was hard interval training. When they gave the athletes the opportunity to slide the session to more accommodate their activation energy to win the workout, to crush the session, they did much better. So that is my green light to all of you to say, if you have a teething toddler at home, if you are late at work one night and you need to sleep in, when in doubt, leave it out, and then get that session done the following day, or even on the second or third day. And then don't worry about the days previous. That might mean that you miss a strength session, might mean that you miss a base pace. And if you get too far off the back, if it's like we're 2 weeks behind, that's when it might be of value to kind of chat and modify the plan for you.
Cool. I'm going to try and ask a couple, kind of integrate a few different questions here. And so they're kind of related. So here's how I'm going to weave these three questions together. So just kind of this, you've used the word like shed a bit, like, what do you mean by kind of shedding a portion of the training? And then specifically, there's some questions how that relates. We have a person who just like finished a 50K last Sunday. Do they need to take a break? What's that period between, this kind of, really what we're talking about is adapting, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
I've got this thing coming up. I need to taper, because there's another question here about tapering. So I think really all three of these questions are really asking around like, what do you mean by shedding some of these workouts, how do I evaluate post larger events and for big pushes that I've made? And then also, as I'm doing this training plan, how am I tapering for the next thing? So they're synergistic.
Yeah, for sure. I think starting with it's a kind of a good case study. If somebody's coming into this plan and they just ran a 50K, say last Saturday, I think that's where it's always easy if you're a multi-sport athlete and you can implement other things that are not damaging. Running's relatively hard on the body. So if you're coming to this plan and there's a base pace run, I would, again, back to what we talked about earlier, I would sub that for a less load on the soft tissue. So I would do an aerobic spin, get in the water, do an aerobic swim, do a Nordic ski, something that's non-impact, for 10 to 14 days post-event. So in other words, I would probably take, it doesn't behoove us to start running straight away after a 50K. And this is making some assumptions on the end of how experienced the athlete is. But I think in general, we can get away with taking 10 to 14 days non-running and just still keep some flushing of the bad blood out and some active recovery going on via Nordic skiing, easy spinning on the bike, swimming, rowing machine, however you want to get it. But I think getting it done with non-impact initially for the first 10 to 14 days post 50K would serve us well. And we'd still be okay ramping into this plan that we've outlined without actually running. I often use these funny terms that, again, I have to be careful because I don't know if they make sense to anybody else, but I'll say shed fatigue or let the cream rise or, spin the gunk out. Ultimately, what I mean, when we're letting the cream rise or we're flushing bad blood out, it's ultimately that we're not damaging our body. We are begin with the end in mind. Our goal for shedding fatigue or freshening up before a race, some people call it tapering. For a highly trained athlete, there used to be this Joel Friel philosophy of, it's like this really complex algorithm of, we're decreasing our volume by 20% and it takes 2.5 weeks or 4 weeks for an Ironman. And what I have found and what I have talked with other athletes and I just truly believe is, for somebody who's relatively well trained, you give that person, 2 to 3 days to let things swing positive and get their energy back up. I mean, really light 2 to 3 days, and we're feeling pretty good. And so when we transition from base phase 1 to 2, or before your event, if we're talking about tapering for an Aspire trip, what I'm really saying there is that you should really let your energy swing positive. When you're in the middle of a big training block, which is base phase 2, we got to take at least 2 to 3 days to put a period and close that chapter. And then you would go into what's called competition period or race season. And the best way to punctuate that is to freshen up. And then you transition into that block or that phase of training. And again, I think the time length on that is a little bit specific to an individual based on their age and multiple other factors. But in general, for a highly trained athlete, I think 2 to 3 light days is enough to let things swing positive and then slowly ramp back in, or just sharpen up before a race. So I don't know if that intertwined those things well enough, but
well, put it in the chat, folks. If it did or if it didn't, help, let us know. One question that's coming in is, we've outlined the spring training community as a 3-month block. We're starting it off in May if we want to kind of join together, and if people want to jump on our Strava community, that's a place for you to kind of be posting your workouts and having some dialogue amongst folks who are generally following the same plan. So we're all a collective resource. So that bracket is really for the next 3 months. So March, April, May, and then going into June, is when our season starts. But there's a question here for folks. We've got folks that are signed up to come do the Stehekin or come do the Territory Run Camp, or maybe they've got a race that's happening, August, September. I mean, so how would you, if someone's coming in, they're doing this, how would you recommend they look at this plan? Should they be extending base phase 1? Should they extend base phase 2? If their goal event is happening, let's say August, September, further out.
Yeah, that's a really good session. The beauty of adding all these layers of fitness early in the season, we can only hold peak competition season for so many weeks. But let's just assume, so we finished this basically June, right? We hit June and we've finished up this program, and we're in pretty good form. Mm-hmm. I think that would be a great time if you're getting ready for, let's just say it's a Stehekin in September. I would go empty the tank a bit, and I would go do, whether it's an intermediary or a stepping stone project, or it's a stepping stone race. I would sign up for something that allows you to get some objective feedback on how you're doing, rather than just continuing to train and keep your fitness tub full all the way until September. What I saw with a lot of athletes that I was working with over this pandemic time is we didn't race because races weren't really an option. And so we had a lot of injuries because people were just training like maniacs. And so the benefit of putting a go run in North Cascades, go, run the coast trail, I would advocate that when you get done with this plan, cash in some chips and empty the tub a little bit, drain some of that fitness, recover, and then you could literally start right back into base phase 2, and that would carry you right into or however backlog you need to go, base phase 1 back into base phase 2, and just backlog it up into the point of your September event, allowing for 2 weeks at the back end, say August 15th, if it was September 1st, August 15th onward, you just work backwards from there, and you could reintegrate the plan, weekly waves, into your scheme. But I would say go, for multiple reasons, go drain the tank a little bit, and again, close the chapter, put a period at the end of this training block, so that you can get some feedback on where you're at, how you're doing. And then you have better guided data on what to do. You may go do a 50K and crush it and have the race of your life and be like, I'm done. I just need to do that again. You might go out and get blisters and mess up your nutrition, and Who knows? But I think that's the value of testing yourself
Yeah, I
before.
mean, in some ways,
You
we're
know,
right back where we started, right? Then we've learned something, we've gotten information, we've learned more about how our body adapts to these different situations. And
yeah,
then, like, it's a constant practice. We're constantly integrating and evaluating and getting more information and making new plans.
yeah.
Cool. We're coming up on our hour. There's one more question here from Ben. Just this is kind of should be an easy one. What is L1 NWB activation?
Oh, there's a YouTube link in there. It's just hip stuff. So if you have a band at home, I prefer the. We've actually done this at the Mount Baker Rendezvous.
Oh yeah.
It's and this is the physio in me, but like I mean, we initiate movement and we generate most of our force from our pelvic girdle, from our hips. And so you will see some proximal hip strength and coordination work in there. L1 non-weight bearing via the link. There's a YouTube link that I put in there of me taking you guys through that. But basically, we're kind of I use this term loosely, but we're activating the hips before we go run in effort to hopefully control what the knee, the foot, and the ankle do to reduce the risk of injury. So don't skip it.
Okay. Great. This has been super fantastic. I think this has really been the goal of session number one is for folks to meet you, to give an overview of the plan, what we've got lined out for the rest of the spring training community. A couple things. So the Strava community is it's a private Strava club. It's the Aspire. We have a public one, and then we have a private one for the spring training community. So this is essentially folks that are training with us. So that's a resource for folks to ask questions of each other, post their workouts, create some accountability. So that's available. We've got 3 more webinars. Andrew will be on each of them and will be available to really kind of get feedback from folks that have questions specifically about how they're doing. So if something comes up for you over this process, he'll be here and be available. And then each webinar will have an additional expert coming in with more information and tools. We've got a data scientist from Koros talking about analytics and data and how, interpreting things coming out of your watch can inform your training. Shannon from Gnarly, who will be talking specifically about nutrition and fueling. And then your friend Kurt is going to come in and give us a wrap. And I believe it's going to be kind of like really kind of about like our mental health and, kind of a mindset for recovery and longevity and yeah, something in those lines. I can't, that sounds right. Yeah. Give me a head nod.
Yeah. Brilliant.
So, great. And the other thing too, so just as folks are tuning out, Andrew is available for personal coaching. So if you're going through this process and you're like, man, I would really benefit from some more individual feedback, he is available for that. I believe there's a link to that on the website. I know there's a survey that's going to come out tonight for folks that have tuned in, and there's a question. So in the follow-up survey, any questions you have, like, was this helpful? Like, yay or nay would be great. What other questions do you have that you'd like to see answered over the course of the training plan? And then if you are interested in learning more about some more individualized coaching with Andrew, there's a place to respond to that, and then we can get you in touch with Andrew. And if there's not, I can't remember if we've got a link to your specific website, but if people wanted to get in touch with you, Andrew, how would they do that?
Probably just shooting an email is probably easiest.
Okay, so that's available. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. It's been a lovely evening. What's exciting to me is the spring training plan is this thing that it's like, hey, the season's coming, summer's coming. Let's put in the work. Let's put the hay in the barn, so that when summer comes, we can all be fit and healthy and ready for some grand adventures. So that's the goal.
100%. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
You bet. All right, we're going to shut her down, and we'll see you all again in a month. Happy training.